So now text files. They consist of consecutive characters, that is successively, continuously you can keep storing information in these files. The manner of interpretation, so when you store data in these text files, how does the user or the programmer interpret it, or how does the computer interpret this information? See, they are formatted type of files. So though you store information continuously, there has to be some meaning to the information that you are storing, because data with meaning is what we call information. So how does the system interpret the data that is stored in these files? The library functions that are used to transfer the information is one way the computer interprets it. So library functions are system defined functions, they are already existing in the language. So based on the library functions, now we will be seeing what are library functions we are going to use on files. Based on the library function that is used in the program, the data within the text file is interpreted. That is, the computer will identify what data within the data file is required by this library function. The second mode is the format specification. Format specification within the library function. See, all library functions will not have the same syntax. One library function will have only one argument. For example, fopen will only have the name of the file and the mode in which the file is to be opened. Whereas fread will have the name of the file, at the same time what is to be done with the information that is read, how many characters are to be read. Like this, the arguments will differ. So based on the format specification, how the library function is formatted, the computer will interpret the interpretation of the data. It will interpret how the data is to be accessed, updated or used. So the type of interpretation depends upon the library functions as well as the format specification within the library function. And finally, they are interpreted as individual data items or components of strings. So this is the final type of interpretation. Because the characters are stored consecutively or successively in a text file, how do you separate it and retrieve it? Whether you are going to separate it as individual characters or individual lines or individual statements, or whether they are going to be a component of data or strings, or whether collectively they are going to make meaning. So how does the data in the file identified and provide meaning to what is being done, to the operation that is being performed? Whether you want to retrieve one word, or you want to retrieve only one alphabet, or you want to retrieve it collectively as a paragraph. When does it make meaning? So this is the meaning of interpreting the data items in a text file, and there are two ways to do it. Next, unformatted data files. So in unformatted data files, what is being done? How is it organized? This organizes data into blocks. So like memory partitions, memory is divided into different blocks, isn't it? Like that, these files also, the storage in these files is in the form of continuous allocation, continuous blocks of memory. You cannot separate words or alphabets from them. They are all pushed together in one block. Blocks contain continuous bytes of information. So that is what make a block, continuous bytes of information. These represent more complex data structures like arrays and structures. So we have studied about what are arrays and structures in C. So here you cannot store individual letters or alphabets with some meaning. They will not make meaning in unformatted data files. Unformatted data files are meant for blocks of information. So when they have to make meaning, it obviously has to be some data structure. A continuous group of 5 bytes forms an array. So that alone has a meaning. Taking one element from an array and expecting it to do something is not going to make sense. Then there is no point in using arrays. We go in for complex data structures only because we need operations that involve so many bytes of information. So in unformatted data files are used for storing such types of information. A separate set of library functions is available for processing such data files. So that is another difference between the text files and unformatted data files. The same library functions are not used here, because here we are not going to access individual data items. Whatever operation is done in a collective manner on the entire data structure. So obviously the operations have to have a different format, either more number of arguments or more number of pointers and so on. So the kind of library functions are also different for both. Next we go on for these low level data files, system oriented data files. They are complicated to work with, and a separate set of procedures with accompanying library functions is required to process these files. So as I mentioned before, this is what makes it more complicated. You don't just have fopen and it opens a file, fclose and it closes a file. You have a separate set of procedures. A procedure is nothing but a function by itself. So when you have to work with these system oriented files, it is like memorizing another function with complicated syntax. So studying that itself is a Herculean task. Then you have to use those functions in order to work with these files. So the time taken is more complicated, the work that is being done is complicated, and the work that you do has to be understood by the user who has to work with these files. So that is another difficult task. That is the reason we don't go in for these system oriented data files at all.